Hey, welcome to Transform Your Workplace. I'm your host, Brandon Laws, and today we've got an episode that hits home for just about every professional out there. I'm joined by Melody Wilding, author of the new book, Managing Up: How to Get What You Need from the People in Charge. Have you ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or misunderstood by your boss? Melody shares how we can master the art of managing up, navigating tricky conversations, setting boundaries, and aligning our work with organizational priorities. From understanding different workplace styles like the commander, cheerleader, caretaker, and controller, to gracefully handling feedback and even quitting conversations, Melody shares practical tools and powerful scripts that you can apply right now to transform your professional relationships. Melody's insights are built from real experiences and backed by tangible strategies that you can use at any level, whether you're an individual contributor or a senior leader reporting to a board. This episode promises to equip you with the confidence and tools to take control of your career and ensure your voice is heard and respected. Before we jump into the conversation, a quick reminder: today's episode is brought to you by Xenium HR. If you're looking to elevate your team's potential, Xenium HR offers leadership and development programs, including leadership cohorts, micro-learning modules, on-demand courses, and monthly virtual workshops, all designed to help your people thrive. If you get to the end of the conversation with Melody and you enjoyed it, please do us a favor, share the episode with a friend or a colleague, hit the subscribe button if you're not a subscriber, and take a moment to rate and review the show. Your feedback helps us bring more incredible guests and practical insights your way. Now, here's my conversation with Melody Wilding. Melody, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on.
So excited to be here. Thank you.
So you're out with a new book. We're recording this on the 13th of March. Your book was out on the 4th. It's doing so well. 5-star review on Amazon, tons of reviews. It's called Managing Up: How to Get What You Need from the People in Charge. So I know a lot of people, they experience this frustration and confusion at work all the time. They say things like, I want a seat at the table. I know I could be making a bigger impact. And I'm sure you've heard statements like these. Is this what inspired you to write the book? Or if you live personal experiences that really caused you to write an entire book about managing up?
I think, like most authors, probably a little bit of both, that I am a recovering, lifelong people pleaser. And so I've had my own challenges of dealing with people in authority and feeling like I didn't know how to push back or give feedback or have those hard conversations until I burned myself out. And so I've always been fascinated with power dynamics in the workplace and assertive communication. And I tend to work with people that are like me, that are deep thinkers and feelers, who also struggle with overthinking their interactions, especially with the people above them. Like, why did that person use a period instead of an exclamation point this time? And I think so much of this has really come to a head in the last 5 years or so, where we all in our work and our careers feel just jerked around at the whim of all of the changes, the personalities, the people that are happening around us. And there were a few key stats I ran across that really made me feel like this book needs to exist. And the first of those is that since 2020, the number of people who don't feel like they're in control of their career, their relationships at work, that number has doubled in that time frame. And then the second stat is that our managers have more effect on our mental health than our doctors, our therapist, and almost as much as our spouse. And so we spend 70, 80% of our lives at work, yet we're just sort of dropped into the workplace. Yes, we're taught you need to be technically strong and be a good project manager, and here's how you run meetings, but no one ever teaches us how to navigate the human dynamics and those invisible, unspoken power dynamics.
Is there a special definition that you use for managing up, or is it just how it's defined, like how most people probably think about it? It's being able to have that conversation with your boss and giving them feedback and managing them.
Well, yeah. So we're on the same page. I define managing up as how do you navigate and build a relationship with the people that have more positional power than you? Primarily, that's going to be your boss. But I think we've had a very narrow definition of managing up. It's time for an upgrade and a rebrand in many respects, because managing up, especially if you're maybe from a bit older generation, certainly I remember in the 90s, if you said managing up, you thought of someone who was like running around juggling their boss's coffee order and laughing at their terrible jokes.
Right.
And that is, number one, that's not what managing up is. That is actually sucking up. But we're talking about managing up here, which does require you to have hard conversations, speak truth to power. And the fact is today that you have to manage up beyond your boss. There are more stakeholders than just your direct supervisor who have say and influence on your projects, on your bonuses, your performance review. And so we don't want to make our boss our single point of failure. We do have to keep in mind that that is an extremely important relationship, but we also have to think more broadly about this skill set as well.
This book could apply to any level, right? So even the lowest level employee to C-level who might report to a board, right? Like somebody who they're reporting to. It could be any level.
You nailed it. Yes, exactly. Right. The C-suite still has to manage up to the board, even if we're someone who is an individual contributor, for example. Yes, you may have a direct manager, but you may also have customers that you report to, or different stakeholders throughout the organization that have more power than you in one way or another. And even if you are a freelancer, a consultant, you're part-time, again, you still have customers and stakeholders. There are still power dynamics there where you have to set boundaries. You have to align with those people. You have to understand how to communicate with different personality styles and how do you secure your advancement. It may just look a little different depending on the actual format of your role.
The bulk of the book, it covers these conversations that we need to have with our manager. And I'm sure this is probably why the book's so popular. It's not all theory. It's like you could literally pick it up and go to a chapter that you probably could relate to at the moment. And you cover, I think it's 10 different ones. I'm not going to cover all of them. I do want to go deep into a few of them. And then I want people to go get the book and cover the rest, because there are some tangible tools and scripts that people can use, which is why, again, I think it's so popular, because it's a very useful tool. I want to get into the alignment conversation. I think this is a big one. You share a compelling story about your own experience about being laid off. Bummer situation. It sounds like it all worked out. You realize later that you really hadn't had that alignment conversation. So maybe explain what that alignment conversation was that you should have had and why it's foundational to career success.
Alignment is one of those corporate buzzwords that sometimes I even cringe at, but it is so foundational, right? Because we need to make sure we're rowing in the same direction as the people around us. Because what can happen, and this is exactly what happened in my case, is that I was working on something that I thought had importance, that my manager seemed to think was important, but it was not aligned with what was important to the rest of the organization. And so when time came to lean out and streamline, my role was cut because I was working on something that was considered, tertiary to the main product. And that made sense. And the problem is I should have seen that coming. And I think deep down I did, and I just didn't have the courage to have this conversation with my manager to push her a bit on what are some of those unspoken priorities? What is keeping you up at night? What are the metrics you are discussing with your own boss or your own leadership? And that's what the alignment conversation is about. Am I working on the right things that are important to not only my manager, but also the organization as a whole? So I always say so much of successful managing up comes from looking for those triple wins. What is something that lies at the intersection of this will be valuable for me, offer me an opportunity, or be interesting or satisfying to me, but also my manager and the organization? Most of the ideas, proposals, projects you want to pursue lie at that intersection of that triple win.
If my manager is not great about have it starting these alignment conversations. I mean, that's probably why you wrote this book too, is to give people tools to have these conversations, especially when their manager is lacking. What kind of questions could I ask my manager to make sure that I'm in alignment with the organization's goals and my team's?
Yeah, I think my favorite one is the one I mentioned a moment ago around what are the metrics you are discussing with your own management, because that helps you understand what is your boss going to be measured on. And it may also help them articulate things that may not naturally show up on the roadmap, for example. So that's one. I also like to ask, what does good performance look like in this role? And then you pause and then you ask, okay, great. Thank you. That's really helpful. Now, what does great performance look like? And that's important. That sort of pause is important because it helps someone, yes, here's the baseline. Here's what good would look like. But then they're forced to think about the next level of what that would look like. So I like that. And even the future pacing of if you look out 3 or 6 months, what would you love to be celebrating at that point? And if you have a manager who really does have a tough time articulating these sorts of things, because some people are just not good at generating vision or thinking about the future, they may be so focused on the present. Sometimes it helps to offer binaries. So would you say if we were going to focus on one thing, would it be more of this or more of that? And for many managers who are already spread really thin, who are scattered, if you present them with an open-ended question, they may not be able to generate a very focused response. But if you can present them with options in that way, it's much easier for them to say, oh, it's actually more like A, not B. Or for them to say, no, it's not A or B, it's actually Z. And it draws that comparison that actually makes it easier for them to articulate what they actually do want.
You suggested scheduling a skip a level meeting, and this is with like a boss's boss. So like I would go over my boss's head, hopefully with their permission, and talk to my boss. But I imagine as people are hearing me say that out loud, that this approach might rub certain bosses the wrong way. So what's the approach that most people can take to make sure that the boss is included in this process so it's a meaningful experience for everybody?
Yes, and a skip level certainly doesn't have to be the first strategy you use. You do need to, and I talk about this in the book, how you have to have organizational awareness. And sometimes skip levels are built into the culture. This is very common in tech companies or more progressive companies where it's expected that you're having skip levels versus a more traditional hierarchical organization. It's going to be, you have to be a bit more sensitive and make sure you have that social capital built up with your manager first. There's a few ways you can approach this. And in the book, I have templates and scripts you can use. But one of them is to explain you don't want your manager to feel like you're doing an end run around them. And so you may approach your boss and say, it's been really helpful understanding from you more about the 10,000 foot mission that we're going after or the vision. What would give me even extra context to make sure that I can make us as successful as possible would be asking your boss some questions like this, and this, and be specific about what you want to ask them so your boss knows you're not trying to go around them. And you could even say as much. You could even say, this is not me. I'm not trying to cut you out of this process. And I really want to be more involved in this. And if asking for kind of a solo meeting with your boss's boss feels like a little too much, instead you could ask, do you think your manager would be open to sitting in on one of our team meetings, for example, or even coming to chat with us as part of one of my one-on-ones? Mm-hmm. So it feels less threatening. You can get a little creative about it.
I feel like you could even pose it as like an informational interview too, because that's like, everybody seems to be open to those. It's like, yes. Cool. Somebody wants to come and ask me a bunch of questions about my career, my team, goals, aspirations. That seems like a pretty like simple way to get in there too.
That's a great way to think about it.
So chapter 2 covers the styles conversation. I love this one. You identify 4 primary workplace styles: commander, cheerleader, caretaker, and controller. Could you give me a brief explanation of each and why you think it's important that we identify what each of those roles might be, depending on who we're talking to in the moment?
Sure. Well, if alignment is what we're focusing on, then styles is how do we work together to accomplish that in the best way possible? And most of what we tend to get frustrated by in the workplace is other people's behavior and approach. It's their style, where we may be someone who wants a lot of context, but we're dealing with someone who's very curt and to the point, and that feels dismissive to us. And so what we often perceive as difficult behaviors are often just the result of these style differences. So this is why it's so important. And you mentioned those 4 C's. Now, we get those 4 C's because if you look at all the psychological research, there's generally speaking 2 dimensions to people's communication styles. The first is dominance, how assertive somebody is. And then the second is sociability. How much do they care about connections and relationships? How much do they prioritize other people? So you get those 4 C's. Now, if someone is high in dominance, low in sociability, they are the commander type. Very to the point, want the bullets, care about results, outcome, not so much about the people involved and how everybody feels about the situation. Then you have someone who is a cheerleader, someone who is both high in dominance and sociability. So these people, they move fast because they tend to be more dominant, but they tend to be more of your big picture thinker, more enthusiastic, positive. And because they're people oriented, they love to be like storytellers and they love to bring people together, but sometimes they can be overly image and reputation conscious. And then you have people who are high on sociability, but low on dominance. Those are your caretakers. The people who want, yep, me too. Totally get it. The people who want stability, harmony. They care about everybody's feelings. Is everyone on the same page? Do we have consensus here? They want to think through decisions before they take action on them, which you can start to see how these styles could be at odds with one another. And then last is the controller, low on both dominance and sociability. This is someone who is very methodical. They value precision. They want you to follow. There is a process and they expect you to stick to it. And that can be great because they create excellent high quality work, but they can be seen as kind of rigid because they're not really open to new ideas. They're not as warm as the other types may be. And so with those 4 styles, it's very helpful to decode who am I dealing with? Because then you know, how do I frame my message around that person's motivations? If you know you're dealing with a caretaker, then if you frame your proposal around how this is going to bring the team together, or this is really going to help us streamline and stabilize our revenue for the year, that's going to appeal to them versus someone like a cheerleader may aspire to, this is going to help us hit our 5-year moonshot goals. So it helps you get buy-in for your ideas because you can frame them differently. And then also make sure someone actually hears your message. So this is not about changing who you are at your core. It's about finding these strategic adaptations so that you can be more effective, whoever you're reporting to or working with.
That's a good distinction because when I first had started reading this and was thinking about like, oh, what if I am interacting with the commander and I'm more of a caretaker? Like, do I need to flex my personalities, my style to them? But it sounds like you're saying like, no, just the way we're framing a message or the way what language we're using that might more adapt. Is that what you're really saying?
Exactly. Even if you are a caretaker, and let's say this is very common, that you as a caretaker realize the team is under so much pressure from this commander that people are burning out. We have folks that are on the brink of quitting. We're starting to make mistakes because people are just tired and overstretched. If you go to them with the caretaker frame of what I just said, people are upset, everyone's burning out, and we can't risk to lose people, the commander's going to, in some extreme cases, say, I don't care, you all need to get this done, right? And I needed this done yesterday. Whereas if you went to them and you framed it more about the end result, the quality, the efficiency, that, hey, this could reflect badly on us, we're missing our targets as a result, and the quality is lower, we're not able to move as quickly, and it's leading us to have to repeat work, which only slows us down further. That's going to land much better with the commander. You're still reaching the same end result, which is let's not burn our people out, but the way you get there is going to resonate with them more.
You said burnout a few times, and that's a perfect segue into the boundaries conversation that I wanted to talk about. I hear this a lot, especially like tied into burnout. The subtitle for this chapter was awesome. It's Say No and Set Limits Without Being a Complete Jerk. And I think that's like so well put, because people struggle with setting boundaries. They will just, like, whether it's their boss projecting or pushing things down to them, they will just say yes and yes and yes and get resentful and then stressed out and then ultimately burned out. How do we begin to set limits with respect and not be a jerk, like you said?
Yes, right. And there's this fine line we have to walk of we have to be a team player. Everyone's being asked to do more, but you don't want to be a pushover. And this comes back to a really key concept in this chapter, which is gauging your pushback power. Because unless you are basically the CEO or someone in the C-suite where you have a lot of leverage, you have a lot of high tenure, you have a very specialized skill set, it's going to be hard for them to lose you. So you have a lot of sway to say no assertively and directly. Most of us have medium to lower pushback power, right? We may have been in an organization for a medium amount of time. We may have a fairly good relationship with our boss. Maybe it's not super positive. All of these things taking into account what's the state of your role, the state of the organization. Is the organization in a period of crisis or relative calm, where if it's in crisis, there is this implicit expectation that it's all hands on deck.
Yep.
And if you say, no, I can't work late tonight, or our team isn't willing to put in this extra effort, there's probably going to be reputational consequences. So we have to take all of this into account and have that awareness of where we're operating. Now, even if your pushback power is on the lower side, all is not lost. There's a lot you can do. You just have to be mindful that you may not be able to be as direct and blunt with your no. You have to be a bit more tactful about how you deliver it. And so there's a bunch of different strategies in that chapter. But two of my favorites are, number one, the trade-off approach, which I think comes in the most handy for most people. And this is that classic, okay, I hear X is important, and now you're asking me to do Y. In order to get Y done, how would you like me to deprioritize X? Or what part of it would you like us to slow down on? So you're essentially saying both of these are not possible. We have to make a concession here. And you're framing it that way, which is great, because you're driving that discussion and you're coming more as a problem solver instead of just, I can't believe you're asking us to do one more thing. You're actually coming from a solution-oriented mindset. And with the trade-off approach, it's great because you can do two things. You can either say, here's my recommendation. These are the trade-offs. Here's my recommendation of how we handle this. Or you can put it back on the other person and say, what would you like to do here? And you can, depending on if you need to be more deferential, that's when you can put it on the other person and say, we'll do what you want to do, but we need clarity on this decision. So that's the first one, the trade-off. And then the second is the conditional yes, where you say yes now, but you set a boundary for later. And so this might be something like, I understand this is urgent. We have to get this to the client. And so I'm happy to work late this time, or I'm happy to squeeze this in for you. But I hope we both recognize that this is an exception. I won't always be able to accommodate a short timeline like this in the future. And if you feel like maybe that's even too assertive, you can say, I would love to sit down after we get through this period and just revisit how we can get ahead of certain things like this in the future. So you can turn it into more of a process discussion. And those two approaches really straddle that line of being cooperative while also setting some limits.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure, like, for a lot of people, like, the boundary things, it's sneaky. It's like a boss will ask you one thing and you say yes. Do it again. Maybe it's something different. Another one-off. You say yes, and then you've not built the muscle like you're describing of like asking those questions and really being collaborative about setting the boundary early on. It's like it's almost too far gone at that point. Do you ever feel like people feel like that? Like it's just too far down the line where they can't really go back and set boundaries?
Yes, I encounter a lot of people who feel like that for sure.
Yeah.
And what I say is we teach people how to treat us. And let me also say that there are truly difficult and toxic cultures,
Right.
and you can only swim upstream so much. But we often have more control than we think. And as you were just saying, sometimes we have inadvertently set up these dynamics where we will overfunction and take on more responsibility than is ours. And we train people to come to expect that will, if you need a volunteer, you'll be the person, or you're the fixer, you're the one who always swoops in last minute. You train people to become dependent on that. And it actually can create this dynamic where other people underfunction. They don't step up because, well, they know you're going to fix it. It'll get done. There's no consequence for them. And so you can change that. You can change that. It takes time and it takes patience because it's almost like shaking a snow globe, right? You're disrupting kind of the equilibrium of the relationship. And it takes some time for it to settle back into a new norm. And so that's why in that chapter, I talk so much about dealing with pushback. Because if you have been someone who has been over accommodating for a really long time, you are going to get some pushback when people think, well, you were fine with this a couple of weeks ago. Now where is this coming from?
Let's talk about another very hard conversation. It's the feedback conversation. There's going to be times where we feel like we're going to need to speak up to our boss, give them feedback. That is intimidating for a lot of people. Probably if they haven't been doing it, it's going to be very uncomfortable the first time they do it. What's the best advice you can give about initiating these challenging conversations in a constructive way that's also respectful to the boss?
Yeah. This may seem a bit counter to everything I was just saying, but ask for permission first. And what I mean by that is, generally speaking, people don't love surprises. We don't like feeling caught off guard. Maybe that's a better way to say it. We don't like being caught off guard. And so if you have feedback for someone, you don't have to say, can I give you some feedback? You can if you feel like you have that trust built up. But ask for a bit of micro buy-in to say, would now be a good time to talk about that last meeting? And if the person says yes, great, they're bought in, at least they know a bit of what's coming next. So that kind of micro yes goes a long way. I think what can also be very effective is creating a shared goal at the outset to show that you are on this person's side. I was just talking to a client earlier who was having to push back. His manager was giving his team a lot of unrealistic deadlines and just continuing to pile on. And so when he approached him recently to have this conversation, he said, I want us to be successful. I know this project is very important for our roadmap, and I want to do everything I can to make that possible. And right now, the deadlines that we have are not realistic, and it's jeopardizing this in the following ways. And so what I want to work with you on figuring out, how do we make these more realistic? And so he was giving feedback basically on his manager's style, but what he did was create a shared goal and explain that, hey, we're both on the same side here. So it didn't feel like him against his manager or him criticizing his manager's character or leadership style. It was more about that specific behavior. And then also him coming to the table with, here's a change I would like to see or a request that I have. And so my client could actually get what he wanted out of that exchange as well.
Now, that sounds very collaborative, and I'm sure in those toxic workplaces that you were talking about, employees who don't have a great relationship with their manager are going to feel like there's retaliation, probably on the other side of that feedback. What are some tips that you have as far as like addressing that retaliation fear?
Yeah. I mean, this is CYA. CYA, for people who are not familiar. Document. Yes, is cover your you-know-what. Yes, exactly. And there are subtle ways you can do this, right? You can say, make sure in emails you're following up, like, to make sure that I've summarized everything from our meeting correctly. Here's what I was taking away from that. So you have that captured and you have that follow-up. I think this is also where that idea of not making your boss your single point of failure becomes really important, because you can do, and I'm very honest about this in the book, you could do everything, you do every single one of these strategies, you can execute them perfectly, and you will still work with an imperfect, difficult manager. And when that happens, you need to make sure you have other advocates. And this is very true. When someone is retaliating against you because of feedback you've given them. You need to make sure that there are other allies, there are other audiences you can bring something to say, I think it would actually be helpful to get a broader perspective on this. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this up in the all hands or in the team meeting this week so that you have other witnesses, so to speak.
I'm going to cover one more and I'll let you go. The quitting conversation. There's a quote that I want to read that I think sets this up. The quote says, "Who cares about managing up at this point? The reality is that most quitting conversations are less of a goodbye and more of a see you later. More than 70% of professionals have landed a job at some point in their careers through their network, which often includes former leaders and colleagues." End quote. I think it's eloquently put because often it's the relationships that we have and graceful exits and those things, they do come back around. I've seen a lot of boomerang employees. I've also seen, you outlined it, like within their network, they're referring to another workplace. So what are some appropriate and graceful ways to exit without burning those bridges?
Well, I think some of this comes before you even deliver the news. You do need to be prepared for any sort of reaction that you get. And you know this, having worked in HR for so long, that you need to be prepared that your boss may say, you know what, thanks for the 2 weeks notice, but no thanks. We're going to ask you to leave today. You have to be ready for that. And so you need to do your own due diligence of making sure that in terms of your own visibility, you have documented any metrics or you've updated your resume, your LinkedIn, while you still have access to presentations and materials. Of course, don't steal anything that is not yours. But I can't tell you how many times people come to me after they've left a role and say, well, I don't know what percentages I increase sales, or I don't have access to those numbers. So do yourself a favor and do that before you deliver the news. And then the other thing you also want to think about is, what is my transition plan? Because that makes the quitting conversation so much easier, so much more forward-looking when you can deliver the news. And by the way, when you do that, it is not the time to have the feedback conversation. You may be leaving because of your boss or because of leadership and the culture, but now is not the time to talk about that. Now is the time to say, I've had a great experience here. Maybe you haven't. If you haven't, you can say, I've learned a lot during my time here, because we all learn a lot, even from working with difficult people. But I've learned a lot during my time here, and effective this date, I'm going to be moving on. And I'd like to talk with you about the transition plan and how I leave the team in the best hands possible. So it automatically makes the conversation so much more forward-looking and solution-focused, rather than, wait, you're leaving us now high and dry? And even if that does happen, if they keep trying to pull it back and kind of guilt trip you, you still have to keep bringing it back to, yes, I've learned a lot from this role. I'm ready for my next challenge. You want to keep it focused on your growth, your development, your next steps, instead of bringing up your grievances, because it just doesn't go well.
Yeah. The book is awesome, Melody. Like when I got to the end of it, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, this is like, even though there's helpful tools and scripts that are meant for an employee to manage up, this is really meant to be collaborative. And those little micro conversations that we're having with our employers or colleagues, it's truly transformational in the workplace if everybody's doing this stuff. So I really hope people pick up the book. What do you hope people get out of it? Like whether it's to go right to your favorite conversation, whether it's like what you hope the outcomes are in the end. I'm just curious what you hope to see out of this.
Yeah, I hope that people feel a greater sense of confidence and control. That yes, this is a book about managing up, which can feel kind of stale, I think sometimes, or kind of old school. But this is, I believe, the most important skill you can have, especially as you advance in your career, and influence, persuasion, getting buy-in, navigating the relational dynamics becomes more important than your technical skills. And as we see AI taking over, right, it's never going to replace the ability to read the room and understand the subtleties and adjust to that. And so this is going to help you future-proof your career. It's going to help you just feel a sense of just self-assuredness every day that you're more in the driver's seat of your career and your path. You're not at the whim of everything happening around you.
One thing I want to say, because you just mentioned AI, something I've done before, and now that I've read your book and had this conversation with you, I'm like, you have so many cool scripts in there and questions. you could use like ChatGPT's voice mode and role play some of these things, because these things require muscle building, practice, practice, practice. And if you don't have somebody close to you that you can practice with to role play before that managing up conversation, AI is a great tool. I don't know if you've ever used some of that with this, but it's a great tool.
I'm thinking about building a Melbot GPT of me, because it's so true, right? Sometimes you just need a running start because you get like blank page or blank conversation syndrome, and just having some starter words or phrases, it goes such a long way to just helping you feel like, okay, I know what to say, and then I can gather the courage to actually do it.
Melody, your book is called Managing Up: How to Get What You Need from the People in Charge. Where can people connect with you, or where do you prefer they buy the book at?
Yeah, you can find more information about my work and the book at managingup.com. Pretty simple. And if you sign up there, if you purchase the book from one of the sites there and you enter your information, I'll send over access. We have a bonus vault of all different scripts and templates from the book, so you can get access to that. And then I'm also active on LinkedIn, so I'd love to connect with people and hear what you take away from the episode.
My guest today has been Melody Wilding. Melody, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode of Transform Your Workplace. The content on this show is strictly for general information and educational purposes only, so that you can go transform your workplace in a positive way. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the show are the guest's own and don't represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of either Xenium HR, the sponsor of the show, or me, the host, Brandon Laws. Additionally, Xenium HR or myself, Brandon Laws, doesn't endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent, so discretion is advised. We encourage you to work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.